as a Media and Communications Program Officer. It's truly a pleasure to be part of this communications masterclass. So today we'll be exploring how we can move beyond just sharing information to creating connection through our communication. And our main focus is on how we can effectively communicate with our donors, our partners, and even the communities that we serve. And we need to do this in ways that not only builds trust, but also inspires confidence and make our impact stories resonate with us and our audiences emotionally. So I'll be sharing some practical lessons from my experience, both at Oxfam and from the places I've worked before. And particularly, I'm going to refer to the most recent documentary project that we have done with Oxfam under the Women's Rights Fund. We'll also have time for reflections and questions at the end. And as you have been told, by the end of this session, I hope that we'll have achieved three main things. So first is that we understand what effective communication with our donors, with our partners, and the communities we serve looks like, and what makes it different from ordinary publicity. Number two, I hope that we also get to explore how to use storytelling, how we use data, and how we use emotional connection to demonstrate impact in ways that resonate with our audiences. And finally, I hope that we also reflect on how each of us within our own organizations can strengthen our engagement practices. And by doing that, probably just to identify what's working, what's not working, and how we can improve communication across our organizations and even at individual levels. So thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? Right. So first questions first. Why communication beyond report matters. So as you heard of, I'm in the development world, and in the development world, we've traditionally been very good at reporting, and this is a way of sharing figures, our outputs, and even activities that we have on the ground. But we need to know that there's a big difference between just doing great work and communicating it well. And we need to also understand that donors and partners are not just interested in the activities that we implement or that we do. They also want to understand the change that's happening. And the truth is that communication that builds partnerships goes far beyond the report itself. So I had someone mention about report writing. So I just want to give a disclaimer that I don't, not reports, I mean grants. I don't write grants, but I know one thing or two about that, but we'll touch on that later in the presentation. So numbers are usually very important because they do inform the decisions that we make. But what about stories? Stories inspire commitment. We also need to understand that communication is not just about creating awareness. It's about also belief. And donors and partners, they're not just there to fund our activities. They fund people and organizations that they trust. So that trust is built through consistent, transparent, and emotionally resonant communication. So like I mentioned, one example that will that demonstrated this for us at Oxfam was the WRF documentary, which we'll get to play at some point here. And you'll see how we turned the outcomes into stories of human transformation. And even that shift in the approach that we took, I have to admit that changed the way donors and partners have engaged with us. So the documentary is just a week old, but we'll be able to see what I'm talking about here. So could we please move to the next slide? Yes. So who are we communicating with? So I have here this slide. One section has the audiences, and the next section has what they value. We need to understand that every communication effort has multiple audiences, and each one values something slightly different. And for us to communicate effectively, we must first understand who we are communicating with. Sorry, and our stakeholders, as you can see, include donors, our implementing partners, local communities, the government, institutions, the media, and even internal teams within the organization. So each of these stakeholders has different priorities and expectations. And for donors specifically, their communication surrounds accountability. They want to know the support is creating a real impact on the ground and on people in the communities. And so what they value most is clarity, they value evidence, and they also value alignment with their priorities. So for partners, on the other hand, partners care about collaboration. They want to feel seen. They want to be appreciated. They want to they want to be seen that their contribution also matters and is recognized. Yeah. And for the communities that we serve, the people, these are just like the people who are at the center or heart of our work, and they value authentic representation. So what our communities want is that their voices are heard, that we protect their dignity, and that the experiences that they have are portrayed truthfully. So you need to understand that one message cannot fit all the three stakeholders. We must tailor communication to meet each group's expectations and emotional needs. So if you think of your most recent communication effort, which audience did you focus on the most, and probably why? Probably you can drop your thoughts in the chat as we continue. Please, let's move to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so I believe most of us have interacted with this if you are in the communications realm. And this is the stakeholder mapping tool. And it is one of the most practical tools for strategic communication. So the main goal of this tool is to understand who your audiences are, what do they care about, and also how much influence, how much influence or interest do they have in your work. And this matrix, it has 4 quadrants. It will help you identify which stakeholder to prioritize in your communication. So if you can see, we have the Y and X axis, and on this one axis, you have influence, and on the other, you have interest. So for the influence, this is basically how much power or decision-making authority a stakeholder has. And on the other, where you have interest, this is, to put it in simple language, how invested or affected they are by the work that you're doing. And this is, so the 4 quadrants, we have high influence and high interest. We have high influence and low interest. We have low influence and high interest. And lastly, we have the low influence and low interest. So for the high influence and low interest, These are people who can shape decisions. Sorry, I think I've skipped. Oh, we start by the high influence and high interest, and these are the key players who are often our donors. We can also have our strategic partners in this quadrant, and other high-level stakeholders. So for these stakeholders that fall under this quadrant, they often require regular, personalized, and very transparent communication. For example, you could communicate this through giving them quarterly updates, sharing impact stories, case studies, and also opportunities for co-visibility. And we'll discuss that in a few. The next quadrant is the high influence and low interest. These are, in this group, consists of people who can, yes, they can shape your decisions, but they're not directly involved in your day-to-day activities. And an example that I've put in here is the government officials, or you can have institutional funders within this group. So one way is to keep them satisfied through giving them concise strategic updates. And these are just updates that highlight the alignment with the broader goals. And for the low influence and high interest group, this include your partners, implementing partners, community organizations that you work with, or even the local media. And these are basically people who care deeply about the work that you are doing, but they have limited decision-making power in what you do. So you need to keep them informed and involved, and through storytelling that we're now going to dive in, social media posts. Of course, now we have LinkedIn, the Facebook, Instagram, etc., and even the newsletters. And then lastly, we have the low influence and low interest. So this is the last quadrant. And these are just the peripheral audiences. Most of them, most people call them the general public. They don't require constant engagement, but they should not also be ignored entirely. So this tool, this mapping tool, helps us ensure that you as a communicator are spending your energy, your communication energy, where it matters the most, and that is in building and sustaining relationships with those who can help you champion or put forward your best foot. Yeah, so we can move to the next slide. As I continue, I know I was granted 2 hours, but I promise I'm not going to spend all of that time. So we'll try and move as fast as we can. So now let's talk specifically about donors, because this is where many organizations either get to build or lose trust. And when we talk about communicating with donors and partners, we need to also understand what truly matters to them. And I've put 4 elements here. And the first one is clarity. When it comes to donor communication, volume doesn't matter. It's how clear you communicate. And our donors tend to appreciate very clear and straightforward communication. They don't want to decode jargon or sift through overly technical reports. So as a communicator, you need to keep it very simple, visual, and very human. They want to understand in a snapshot what difference their support is making without having to decode complex language or endless acronyms. And secondly, it's evidence and emotion. Donors always want both. They want to see the data, but they also want to feel connected to the people behind the numbers that you present. So we all know that figures and even facts can go a long way in establishing credibility. But if you infuse emotions into them, those numbers can turn into life. So maybe give an example of if you have a statistic like, well, we trained 500 women, that will only become meaningful when it's paired with a voice or a story that shows what that training changed in somebody's life. Yeah. And thirdly, on what donors value most is consistency. Don't just aim to communicate when you need funding or during reporting season, which most people do. You need to be sharing regular updates, even your small wins. This goes a long way to build trust. And donors tend to value relationships that are not only nurtured through um, regular updates, but also honest updates. So we need to be consistent in our communication, not just during the reporting cycle that, like I've mentioned, but you need to keep that rhythm going, and that will also show transparency and continue to build trust that you have between you and the donor, even when things don't go perfectly. And finally is on alignment. And in this, you just need to ensure that your stories show how your work advances the donor's mission. And donors love to see that their investment is part of a bigger shared goal. And donors necessarily need to see how your work connects to their mission. So it's not about reshaping your story to fit theirs. It's more of drawing clear lines that show shared purpose. That is how your efforts contribute to the bigger picture that they care about. So when you communicate with this mindset, you are not just reporting the impact on the ground, but you'll also be nurturing a relationship with your donors. Yeah, so can we move to the next slide? So yeah, when we talk about communicating impact, data tells us what happened, but it's in the stories that will tell us why it mattered. So I want to introduce a concept here, the story of change framework, which kind of almost resonates with many of you, or many of you interact with the theory of change. But this framework helps us move beyond just reporting activities to capturing transformation in a way that will resonate with our audiences. And I want to bring this to life with a real example, the Women's Rights Fund documentary that I've talked about, which we recently produced. And just as a prologue, the documentary aimed to highlight the impact of the fund, but more importantly, the voices of the grassroots women leaders driving change. So I'm going to ask Sharon to please play that documentary to give us a breather, and we'll continue once it's done. It's a very short documentary. It's a 5-minute documentary, and I hope you find it interesting. So Sharon, please. Not the next slide. I'd sent a link for the documentary.
As they work on that, so far so good. If you have a question, please remember to drop it in the Q&A.
With a woman, with an idea, with a voice that refuses to be silenced, and with the power to lead when given the space and the trust to do so. Across Kenya, 4 women-led organizations have stood in that space. They've turned pain into purpose, exclusion into opportunity, and tradition into transformation. And they are part of something bigger, the Women's Rights Fund, a bold initiative by Oxfam that believes real power belongs with those on the front lines.
The Women's Rights Fund is a project that was basically implemented to address the funding gap that exists within grassroots women's rights organizations. Most of the time, they don't meet the requirements that institutional donors ask for whenever they are funding opportunities.
It is not as rigid as most traditional conventional funding models. It allows the women's rights organizations to make decisions on what they want to prioritize in terms of, their work plans, their mandates, and their areas of focus.
What sets these 4 women's rights organizations apart, first of all, is the different sectors in which they work in.
Usikimie was founded because of the prevalence of gender-based violence, as well as escalating cases of femicide.
Our aim is to see, women and girls enjoying the same rights as anybody else.
The formation of AWEC was inspired by the clamor for women's inclusion
It's
within the mining and
buffering.
energy sectors.
AWEC focuses on small-scale women in agriculture in the rural areas of Kenya, and also the vulnerable women living in urban informal settlements.
The 4 women's rights organization gave us a diverse perspective in terms of the intervention. Some of the areas which are really not a technical expertise for Oxfam, but through these women's rights
I'm not sure what happened. Sharon, are you still there?
Just give us a minute. Let me try. I don't know why it's pinging on my end. Let's reconnect again. Just give me a minute.
With a woman, with an idea, with a voice that refuses to be silenced, and with the power to lead when given the space and the trust to do so. Across Kenya, 4 women-led organizations have stood in that space. They've turned pain into purpose, exclusion into opportunity, and tradition into transformation. And they are part of something bigger, the Women's Rights Fund, a bold initiative by Oxfam that believes real power belongs with those on the front lines.
The Women's Rights Fund is a project that was basically implemented to address the funding gap that exists within grassroots women's rights organizations. Most of the time, they don't meet the requirements that institutional donors ask for whenever they are funding opportunities.
It is not as rigid as most traditional conventional funding models. It allows the women's rights organizations to make decisions on what they want to prioritize in terms of, their work plans, their mandates, and their areas of focus.
What sets these 4 women's rights organizations apart, first of all,
Founded because of the prevalence of gender-based violence, as well as escalating cases of femicide.
Our aim is to see, women and girls enjoying the same rights as anybody else.
The formation of AWEC was inspired by the clamor for women's inclusion within the mining and energy sectors.
AWEC focuses on small-scale women in agriculture in the rural areas of Kenya, and also the vulnerable women living in urban informal settlements.
The four women's rights organization gave us a diverse perspective in terms of the intervention. Some of the areas which are really not a technical expertise for Oxfam, but through this women's rights organization, we were able to intervene in those areas.
The Women's Rights Fund doesn't tell women what to do. It asks, what do you need? Then listens, then funds, then walks beside them, not ahead. This is localized aid in action, flexible, trust-based.
Human Rights Fund has supported the community that we are working with in areas of food security and climate action. And this has made the women so alert and so aware about the impacts of climate change and the importance of agroforestry.
Flexible funding is not just about giving out money, to women's rights organizations. It's about shifting the decision-making power to the women's rights organizations at that level, and are the ones who are able to tailor, interventions that will serve these communities.
We have realized that community-based impact programming is really critical. So we make sure that the projects that we have a sustainability component that will allow the communities to continue on beyond AWEC's existence within these communities.
Even as we exit WRO, we are not scared because the Women's Rights Fund has really given us the growth that we needed, the stamina. We are able to really apply for funding to pitch, and people can see what we are doing.
We have put measures into place, such as diversification of funding.
We know that we are quite capable of being funded the way we are now.
AWEC has been strengthened enough to be able to take care of the issues that we struggled with, because we've been able to secure more funding from other donors. We've been able to grow our brand and the AWEC name and its credibility is out there.
There's more impact with working with such a model as opposed to, having layers of bureaucracy before you're able to reach their communities. So it is a model that has been able to
Hello, Sharon.
I think we are having a problem with this video. Maybe we can have the link. I think it's been sent in the chat. Then we can
but it's
watch.
also
We can watch
influencing
later.
donors,
Then we
it's also
proceed with the
influencing other civil
session.
society organizations
It's
and how they
getting
operate.
stuck.
What does it look like to truly shift power? It looks like this: resilient women, resourced organizations, respected knowledge, real change. This is the Women's Rights Fund. This is how change begins.
All right. Thank you, Sharon. Apologies for everyone. It looks like We were having some technical issues, but I hope the message was communicated. That's maybe you can just pull up the slide again on the sixth slide, and from the data to story. Yes, yeah. Yeah, so that is one of the most recent documentaries that we produced. You can check it out on our social media platforms so that you can engage with it more. We'll also be, for the 4 organizations that have been mentioned there, we also did individual documentaries just to focus on their journeys with the fund. They have since transitioned, and now we were communicating to the donor about how the fund impacted their organizations. So it's really interesting. If you get the time, just head to Oxfam's Kenya YouTube page or our social media handles. But as Sharon has said, she'll also share with you the link to the video. Yeah, so quickly, I want to talk about how this was done using this story of change framework. And first, we begin with context, and that's just setting the scene. And here is, we ask ourselves, what problem existed before the intervention? What kind of barriers were these women or the communities or partners facing? And so the context majorly grounds the story in reality and will help also donors understand the why behind the work. So for instance, now that you've seen the documentary, we show the realities, the social realities, and even economic realities that women face. And this has helped our audiences who have since interacted with this piece, especially our donors, understand why the work mattered before we even introduced the interventions. And so there was a framing of the whole problem, and this is on how the women's rights organizations struggle to secure long-term funding and visibility therein. And secondly, we have the intervention, and this is what was done and how it was done. And in here, we get to describe the specific actions taken under the WRF, that's the Women's Rights Fund, the partnership that we've been able to form, and even the strategies that we've used to address that challenge. So in doing so, we showcased the fund itself, not just in what the fund does, but why it also matters. And we've also highlighted the actions taken. You've seen representatives from Oxfam, who some are also have joined us today. And you've seen how the organization, now Oxfam, and the partners supported each other to drive these dialogues. And there's also a mention of capacity building efforts within the story. So the intervention section translates our strategies into relatable initiatives, which are also human scale. And then we go to the transformation, which basically is the heart of the story. What shifted because of the intervention? And this is where we now show the human impact. Is there increased confidence? You've seen there's the CEO of EWAC has mentioned how they are now confident that they can write proposals to seek for grants. Are there people, women who have better livelihoods? Do they have stronger voices in decision-making spaces? So transformation is what will make the story memorable. And this is where the emotional core of the story comes in. Basically, it's just the visible change that we can see in people's lives, in their perspectives, and even the opportunities that they can get or interact with. So with the documentary, we followed the specific women leaders who are under the fund, and we got to showcase their journeys and how they had transformed through the fund support. And you've seen how we've shown how some of them have gained confidence and even visibility as community leaders. Yes, so evidence also follows closely, and this is what grounds the story in credibility. And evidence here could be data, it could be testimonials, it could be quotes, or just observed change that demonstrates that the transformation truly took place or happened. And with evidence, it helps our donors see that the impact is not just emotional, but it's also verifiable. You see, we backed up these stories with the real numbers. There are training sessions that occurred, and also there are advocacy outcomes. And just to strengthen the visibility, you can see, even if you will get time to watch the next videos that now focus solely on their journeys as individual organizations, there are many women that have been trained through this fund. There have been policy shifts, and there have been also improved access to infrastructure. So data just serves as proof points that also gets to back up the emotional storytelling, so to speak. And finally, we touch on voice, which by far is the most powerful element. And this is just about letting the people at the center of the story speak for themselves, as you've seen. So just touching still on the Women Rights Fund, you see that the women narrate their own experiences, and this makes it be more authentic, and you can see it's also empowering. With their own words, they get to humanize the statistics that a report could have not done. And it also reminds us that behind every data point, there's a person with a lived experience. As you've seen, their voices have carried authenticity and power, and it also reminds viewers that indeed impact is not just something that we say we created, but it's something that they've experienced, and they are expressing it too. So most importantly, this story was told in their own voices, and yeah, that's the bottom line. So I can also brag that the result was powerful. We have since shared this with our donors, and for them, they didn't just see the outputs; they felt the transformation, and yeah, that's just the power of storytelling in communicating impact. So we could move to the next slide on the example. All right. So in this slide, basically it illustrates how storytelling can go a long way in transforming our perception. So if you look at the first statement, it says 20 women trained in leadership. That is very factual, but it's flat. And this is something you could find in a report. It tells what happened, not why it matters. There's no emotional connection or sense of transformation. Sorry, it's just raw data. And now compare it to the second one. Mary, once a shy community mobilizer, now leads county level advocacy on gender equality. So you see that this version brings the story to life. It puts a human face to the data. It also shows growth. It shows confidence and a real world impact. So both statements are true. But you find that one moves data into narrative, and that's the kind of communication donors remember and share. They will remember Mary. They won't remember the 20. So the goal here is just to move from reporting our outputs and to narrating the outcomes. Yeah, that's like simply put, moving from the statistics to stories of change. Just to reiterate again, that when donors and partners can visualize the people behind those numbers, then the message in itself becomes more memorable, more relatable, and more inspiring. Thank you. Let's move to the next one. Yeah, so I'm going to share with you some practical storytelling tips. And I just want to say that when you are crafting your stories, first you need to focus on transformation, not the activity that that's done. And most donors, or probably all donors, and even the communities that we serve in, connect with change. They don't go about connecting with checklists, whether this was done, that was not done. It's the change that they want to see. So instead of saying what was done, show how people's lives, mindsets, attitudes, or opportunities have shifted as a result of the work that you're doing. Just like instead of saying we held 10 workshops or we trained 500 women or 50, show how those workshops changed lives. 2, aim to use authentic voices. Let participants, the partners and local leaders tell the stories themselves. And you will find that the most powerful stories will come directly from the people affected. Yeah. So let them speak for themselves, let them narrate their own stories. Their words will carry a lot of honesty and depth that institutional language can't replicate. Even from the video that we just played, well, we had representatives from Oxfam, but their story had a certain depth when you had the perspective from the women that benefited from the fund. And third, you need to balance your data and emotions. So if you combine a few strong numbers with a good human story, that will be more powerful than the long statistics that you get to interact with. Well, numbers will make your story very credible, but if you infuse emotions in your story, it will also be more memorable. So try and blend your stats with your personal narratives, just so that your audience could feel both the scale and also the significance of the impact. And finally, on the final tip, try and keep your stories simple and human. And just like I'd mentioned before, avoid donor-heavy language or very technical language. As you've mentioned, clarity is very key. And try and focus on stories that anyone of any background can understand. Can understand and connect with on a personal level. Try and be as simple as you can and be honest in your storytelling, because that is what will stick at the end of the day. The main goal here is to make your story memorable. I've said this again and again. Make your story memorable and relatable. Don't strive for perfection. That's where now you might mess. Yeah, so that is on the on some storytelling tips that I thought I could share. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Yes. So as a communicator, you know that communication is not a one-off event. This is a continuous relationship. And once you build trust, you have to maintain it. It's just like going to the gym. Once you get your dream body, you have to maintain it. And to sustain that trust, we must try and communicate consistently, not only when we need to report. You find that partnerships will thrive on very regular but also meaningful communication, and this will not just be during either project launch or during reports, but you need to have ongoing updates that one shows progress, shows learning, and even commitment. So try and share your updates and progress and even the lesson learned continuously. That is one. And then two, share credit generously. As a tip, try and recognize your partners publicly. This will go a long way in strengthening your collaboration. So try and acknowledge your donors, acknowledge your partners, acknowledge even the communities that you serve publicly. And this you can do in your videos, in your social media posts, or even during your events. Many times you will find that visibility builds loyalty, because when people feel seen, the result of that is that they also feel valued. So of course they'll be loyal to you. Third, be transparent. Don't shy away from challenges. Donors, of course, will respect honesty. And it also goes a long way to show integrity when you communicate how you're addressing your obstacles. And they'll appreciate your honesty and lesson learned more than having a polished perfection. And finally, try and look for opportunities to build visibility together. And here, things like co-branded communication materials or joint storytelling initiatives, or even collaborative social media campaigns reinforce shared ownership. So when you're building relationships, when partners see that you value collaboration, they will not just be your funders, for instance. Now, speaking of donors, they will also become your advocates. And we do this a lot. We try to collaborate with our partners and even our donors in creating our communication materials. If you go through our social media handles, for instance, you'll see that we tag our partners, we tag or mention what is it called? Even agencies that we work with, or government bodies, or even individuals. So that's how you nurture your relationships. And you also need to know that trust the bottom line here, the trust will grow through consistent communication and transparency. I think that's my bottom line. So we are cruising nicely. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Yeah, so I'm briefly going to touch on challenges and opportunities. Forgive me if I'm going fast, but I also don't want to keep you for a long time. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat. Yeah, so in practice, development communication, or as some people know it as communication in development, it's not easy. Communicating impact is not always a straightforward thing. Many a times we deal with very sensitive stories, stories that involve trauma, stories involving poverty or injustice. And we must communicate them with not just dignity, but also with care. So when telling stories about communities that have faced discrimination, for instance, or displacement, or that are facing hardship, we as communicators carry a huge responsibility. And you find that the line between awareness and exploitation can always be very thin. We then have to ensure that the stories we tell preserves dignity. And this is showing people not just as victims in these stories, but as agents of change in their own lives. An example that somebody told me recently is avoid woishe stories. I don't know how to directly translate that to people who don't understand what woishe means, but somebody can put it in the chat. And so if we need to preserve dignity of these the people we are trying to tell the stories about. And means you need to get informed consent. You need to let them review or approve their narratives so that they okay it. And we also need to be mindful of how their images or words may circulate online. So I think we all know what ethical storytelling is. I just want to touch on it. It's not just about silencing the hard truths, but you find that it's about framing these truths responsibly. Yeah, so with that, there's also a balance that you find between transparency and confidentiality. And this is just being open about results and the challenges that you face or they face, but never compromising their privacy or safety. So when you are telling your stories, try and tell the truth without exposing or exploiting anyone. Well, donors need transparency. Yeah, they want to understand how their funds or investments are performing and how the resources are used. But at the same time, the people behind these stories deserve confidentiality. So it's more about striking a balance where we can be open about the results we've achieved and the lessons we've learned without necessarily having to compromise their safety or trust. And sometimes this may mean you as a communicator anonymizing their data or using what's it called, the composite stories, or sharing lessons thematically rather than sharing them personally. So if you're transparent, that of course builds credibility. I think I've lost my train of thought there for a minute. But what I wanted to essentially say that transparency and confidentiality are essential to ethical communication. Let me touch on impact inflation, which is another risk. This is basically overstating success to please your donors or funders. While this is very tempting, and we've seen news on certain organizations or agencies or bodies that do this, it's usually very tempting, but you see in the long run, it could erode or undermine trust between you and your donor. So there's usually a high pressure to show big numbers or dramatic results, or even sometimes instant transformation. And this probably mostly it's mirrored on in donor reports, or even sometimes the media outputs that we have. The problem is this can backfire, and when it does, it will erode your credibility when these results that you have put out are scrutinized, or when the expectations are not met. Yeah, so you want to be a trusted organization, and then that means you need to be honest in your communication, and you need to acknowledge your progress needs to be done still. So if you share your the lessons that you've learned, the challenges that you've faced, and also what didn't go as planned, this will help your donors see you as very grounded, very reflective. Yeah, they won't see you as defensive because now you've also shown vulnerability. So that will help building a partnership that is based on authenticity rather than just pure performance. Yeah, so finally, we must also ensure that authentic voices are the ones that lead the narrative. And this is especially on the communities that we work with. So there's this tokenism, which is a vice that we all need to avoid by making sure that the communities that we serve are genuinely represented and not just featured in your story. So maybe just to explain what tokenism is, let me see, it's the superficial inclusion of either groups or individuals, and especially those from the marginalized communities. And this most people do to give the appearance of diversity or representation or participation without actually giving them a real influence or voice in decision making. So in communication and storytelling, tokenism happens when we feature communities or people's stories, but don't involve them in shaping how those stories are told. So imagine a donor video, probably just like the one we shared, about women's empowerment, where a woman from a community will come and appear on camera, but her story is heavily scripted or narrated by the organization instead of her own words. Well, she's included visually, but she doesn't truly participate in defining how her experience is represented. And this is not like from the video that we just played. Well, I did the narration, the voiceover, but you see, I didn't tell their story in narrating some parts of the story. they got to share their own experiences. They got to share their own journey and the impact that the fund had. So tokenism will be now doing the opposite, where I just have their videos shown, but I'll be narrating from the first minute to the 5th minute without giving them a chance to define her own experience. So yeah, that's tokenism, and that's it centers the organization's narrative rather than the lived experience of the person. Yeah, so we also need, we just need to avoid this, and as I've said, you need to involve the communities that we represent or we want to feature in the whole process of storytelling. So let them choose what's shared, how it's framed, and also let them choose how they're represented. And you find that when you give people the control of the narrative, we move more on the collaboration rather than being extractive. Sorry. And that's where now you find transformative storytelling starts at that very point. So these challenges that we've mentioned here and are very real, but there are also opportunities if you look at them from a different lens. And these are just, there are also opportunities to communicate with more empathy, professionalism, and integrity. So as a communicator, try and be deliberate in letting these communities just tell their stories with agency, not just as backdrops to our programs. Okay, we are almost done. So as we are almost closing, I'd like to pause here for a quick reflection. And I want you to think about your organization or the current project that you're currently doing. And in these 3 reflection questions, number 1 is, what do donors value most in partnerships? And this is a question I encourage just anyone to sit with, because as we've seen, donors today are not only looking for good reports, they're also actively looking for relationships that are built on trust, relationships that are built on learning, and relationships that are built on shared values. So try and have honesty over perfection. And when you communicate with, of course, transparency, when you show that you're adaptable and grounded in evidence, you become a partner, not just a grantee. And number 2, reflect on this too, as how can we better demonstrate impact and accountability? As we know, impact is more than numbers in a report. It's also about the stories that those numbers do tell. And number 3 is, what should we improve in our communication practices? In your own organizations, you can find blind spots in how you communicate. Some of us or some of you may focus too heavily on activity updates, and you might end up losing the human story. Or you could find organizations having very beautiful stories, but then they forget to back them up with real evidence. Yeah. So try and reflect on that. Are your stories strategic or are they reactive? Do they reflect the diversity of voices that you work with? Or maybe are you consistent? Are you consistent in how you share the updates with your donors or with your partners or even the communities that you serve? So feel free to share your reflections again in the chat, and we'll revisit this after I'm done with the presentation. So the last slide. So as we wrap up, let's just try and bring it all together and mention that at the very center of effective communication is impact that is not only real but feels human. Sorry. As you've mentioned before, numbers matter because they give us scale and credibility, but also stories will give meaning to those numbers. And secondly, our second key takeaway is trust is our strongest currency. So whether it's donors, whether it's partners or communities, they don't just invest in the results, they invest in people they believe in. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, let those we serve speak for themselves. We find that real transformation will get to happen when voices from the ground, this is women, caregivers, youth, and even the communities that we serve, tell their own stories. You must always understand and remember that our role as communicators is to amplify and not to overshadow. So as we move forward, let's just remember that our task as communication professionals is not just to report on the impact, but it's also to make the impact resonate. Yeah, so when you do these three things, communication will not only be about messaging, but it becomes relationship building. And with that, I think you can just move to the last slide now. So yeah, with that, I just want to thank you all for joining. And as we close, that's the thought I want to leave you with. Facts inform, but stories inspire action. Just to elongate on that is that the data we do collect is very powerful. Of course, it gives us the evidence, it gives us the structure, it gives us the direction, but it's the stories that move people, it's the stories that turn statistics into empathy, it's the stories that turn the policies into passion, and it's the same stories that turn partnerships into purpose. So once again, thank you all. I'll be reading through the chat to see if you have reflections. Yeah, so let's reflect on this, and I beg to stop there. I hope also these insights will help you think differently about how we tell our stories. Yeah, so thank you, and back to you, Sharon.
Thank you very much. This is not Sharon, this is Rose. We will throw the baton back to Sharon in a few. Thank you very much, Mr. Frederick. You have run through a lot of information in such a short while, and I must appreciate that this session, apart from being informative, it has also used multiple different ways of instruction, and that is quite meaningful. Thank you very much for taking us through the whole session of being able to meaningfully and effectively communicate to donors and other stakeholders. I think at this moment, as we are encouraged to send our questions on the Q&A session, because at the moment I cannot see any, I would first like to send a great shout out to you for being able to make us resonate with telling a story that brings impact, that shows emotion, and not just being able to overshadow the storytelling. And for me, there are a few more takeouts additional to what you have mentioned. One of them is you started by saying we can move from a place of just giving statistics to creating connections. So it's no longer just about the numbers, about this is what we have done, the activities. It is more about the lasting relations and connections, and being able to connect also to the stories, relating to the stories that are being told. The other thing is that you said that there's a difference between doing great work and communicating the great work done in a great way. So I think in many cases, a lot of groups, a lot of communities, a lot of organizations do great things out here. But to what extent can we communicate what we have done? How well do we communicate it? How empathetic does it get? How much relatable does it get? And you have clearly expounded on that. Something interesting that I have picked out today that you may have just mentioned in passing is that um, we need to communicate consistently, but not just consistently, also meaningfully. Sometimes consistent communication that does not carry the kind of information that we would like to share with our audience becomes a problem again, becomes nagging if you're not sharing the kind of things that the audience would like to be listening to. So we should make consistent communication, but also meaningful. And in this case, meaningful for donors, for example, would include showing progress and also telling them about what learning areas we have had. So of importance, consistency, but also with great meaningfulness in our consistency. I finally would like to say that I have learned that I would be more deliberate. I would be more deliberate in letting the people that we serve, the communities, the young people in my case, to tell their stories with agency and not just appear as part of our story as an organization. Let us give them an opportunity to hear their own voice. And you mentioned something. I am now running back to the charts. You mentioned something about let us not be wishy, and wishy is not an official term, even in the Swahili language, but it is a term that most Swahili speaking people can relate very much to, and it is an extreme sense of pity. Reading from the charts, Joyce says that Woshe means pitying stories. Chelsea says Woshe are stories clearly made to garner sympathy or pity and not to showcase transformative change and impact. And I totally agree. We share stories of of feeling vulnerable or pitiful, of making more vulnerable people feel pitiful or come out as pitiful, I would say. Jessica mentions, since also as part of the reflections, that our role as communicators is to amplify and not overshadow. Love that. I totally love that as well. And I think for me, not just for the space where I'm in, but also in the other spaces where we are part of as the community. But sometimes I like to think about myself in both ways. Sometimes you are the communicator, but sometimes you're also part of the community that is being served. In cases where you're being served, you also get an opportunity to tell your story. So I appreciate being able to amplify and not overshadow, and also probably get an opportunity to tell my own story in a case where they have come to my community. I am looking forward to seeing questions in the Q&A session, in the Q&A area. In the meantime, again, I'm still reading through some of the charts. Elizabeth says this was an amazing session. Jacqueline says that she loves communication about relationship building. Colin says that thank you. That was very clear and concise. This is a good approach to let communities determine what they value most to deal with. It's a dynamic shift from what we have known donors to do since time immemorial. And this brings me to the point where you mentioned about what did we call it? Let me just confirm what we called it. Impact inflation. Impact inflation. I think as a part of a community, once or twice before, we may all have been part of an impact inflation or a space where the impact of what was done in the community was ballooned to look greater than what actually happened. And this has opened my eyes to be able to see and probably even speak out against spaces where impact inflation becomes a problem. And there is really no need for dramatic results. I think I appreciate better that you have been insisting accepting challenges, accepting lessons, accepting downsides is more authentic than ballooning the impacts, because they may just end up being our downfall. People end up losing the trust and authenticity. So thank you very much, Mr. Frederick, for taking us through that. I can see that there is a quick question on the chat, on the Q&A. In the meantime, please continue sending your reflections on the chat of the 3 questions that were asked. Jessica Mutugi asked, I am trying to understand how do organizations navigate the tension between creating a powerful emotional appeal that motivates donors to give and maintaining the ethical storytelling boundaries that respect the dignity of the people represented. If you could take that, Mr. Frederick.
Okay.
How do you organize? I could run it through again.
Yeah.
How do organizations navigate the tension between creating powerful emotional appeal that motivates donors to give and maintaining ethical storytelling boundaries that respect the dignity of the people represented?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Yeah, and it's right at the heart of ethical communications within development work. So maybe a few pointers. You can start with the purpose and not pity. So ask yourself as an organization, why are you telling this story? Before you ask yourself, how do we make it compelling? Yeah. So your goal is not to elicit sympathy or guilt. Your goal here is to inspire solidarity and action, so to speak. And that, as I'd said, means framing people as agents of change, not as helpless victims. So, for instance, instead of showing suffering to drive donations, try and show resilience and progress. Basically, people shaping their own futures with support. And 2, try to uphold dignity through context and consent. Of course, like I'd mentioned before, ethical storytelling begins with having informed consent. And this is just basically ensuring that the individuals or participants understand how their stories and images will be used, and that will give them the power to either decline or revise. And on context, maybe if you add context, that will ensure that the story that they tell is not just sensationalized. So instead of you as a communicator isolating moments of hardship, try and show the whole picture. And this is their challenges, their strengths, or even their aspirations. And what else? I think also try and shift from showcasing a lot of poverty. Most people call it the poverty porn, and try to focus more on narratives of partnerships. So you see, like in the past, emotional storytelling often relied on images that evoked a lot of pity. But today you can see that most communication initiatives focuses on partnership, and they try to portray people and communities not just as recipients like of funds or help, but collaborators. So maybe an example is, if you, rather than you trying to say that, well, this woman was saved by our program, you might say, like, through our partnership, this woman accessed resources to grow her leadership, or yeah, something like that. So I don't know. I think I don't know whether that answers your question. I hope it does.
That was Jessica Motuki's question, and I think I totally feel like it has answered. It is difficult, but it is doable. It is not the easiest thing to do, I agree, but it is doable, and it comes back to our ethical backing. Joyce Mbingo asked a question. Many a times, it concerns me to see donors focus on targets more than impact. How do we ensure that we highlight these stories without deviating the donor's demands?
You're absolutely right. Well, most donors will focus a lot more on metrics. But you see, real impact lives within the nuance of human stories. So for you to balance the two, you need strategy, you need courage, you need craft. So like I had said, one, try and translate numbers into meaning. So instead of rejecting the donor metrics, try and reframe them through your storytelling. So for instance, like the example I'd given, if a donor wants to see that 500 women were trained, don't just list that figure, show what that number means in lived experience. For instance, you can say, among the 500 women that you got to train, many probably give a name like Amina in Marsabit. Many have gone on to lead local campaigns, maybe for childcare infrastructure. That's what transformation will look like behind those numbers. So this way you can meet the donor reporting needs as you center the human impact. But you can also use the story as evidence, not just as an embellishment, for lack of a better word. So, of course, stories are qualitative data. And when you position stories as proof of impact and not decoration, the donors will begin to see them as integral to accountability rather than what's the word, divergence from it. And three, yeah. Try to align your story framing with with donor outcomes. So of course, we find that every donor will have their own priorities. We can have gender equity, resilience, climate justice, etc. So the key is to try and connect your stories to these outcomes without letting them dominate your narrative. So I'm trying to think of an example. So maybe, well, you can say things, something like, the story that you now have produced illustrates how women's economic empowerment contributes to climate adaptation, which is now a shared goal between the communities and the partners. So in this, you show alignment, with the priorities of the donor without really surrendering your authenticity. But one last point is you can also educate donors through your storytelling. So sometimes the role of a communicator is to lead donors to deeper understanding. If you consistently weave the stories that show not hardship, complexities, you will get to shift that narrative from counting how many activities that you've done to understanding the transformation that is taking place on ground. So that is how even organizations like Oxfam change how impact is perceived. So it's just not transactional, but we aim to be also transformational. Yeah. Thank you. I hope I've answered your question.
Okay, Mr. Frederick, I think that is quite elaborate. You're quite elaborate in your response, and I would say that I could just probably love to add that as you've mentioned last, sometimes we educate donors through these stories, and you may just if they continue to be your donors in another donor cycle, you may just be shocked to find that instead of increasing their targets in terms of numbers, they also alterate the kind of targets that they give to you. They now lean more towards impact than numbers, thanks to how you reported or how you communicated the previous impact. Thank you very much, Mr. Frederick. At this point, I am looking at the Q&A session, and I do not seem to see any additional questions. Joyce has agreed that she is content with the response you have given to her question, and so is Jessica. So thank you very much. I would like us to just give our appreciations to Mr. Frederick. Thank you for taking your time. Thank you for sharing this amazing presentation. I am going home with a lot of things today, but very importantly that I am giving control of the narrative to the people who are part of the narrative, to the people we are working with. And I am just helping to tell that story. I am not overshadowing the story. I am also taking home a lot of things, and I am taking home that I will start with a purpose. I will start with a purpose in mind when telling a story, when communicating an impact. And once the purpose begins, and the rest will follow and will fall in. People should and will always be framed with positivity, dignity, their dignity put forth, and frame their stories as agents of change more than making them pitiful. And I agree that you have shared a lot of things, and this is now my I implore the members of this team. We have learned a lot. Let us not just learn that and put it somewhere on the side. Let us try and apply it. And I must say that we will be back to be grateful for this maybe later in our career. We have also been learning a lot of other things which you have linked in your presentation, despite having not been sitting with us in the other sessions. So that is very commendable. It means we are within the right track. I would like to implore or challenge us again to be able to link everything we have been learning, because at the end of the day, we should leave here as better communicators. I am Wadi, so at this point I will stop there. I'm not sure if my co is still within and would like to say a word. In the meantime, I would like to also send appreciations to the brainchild behind all this. This is Ms. Sharon's brainchild, and we are happy to be part of it. Sharon, thank you for putting this together. At this point, I would probably like to welcome you to say a few closing remarks.